Hi, I'm Erik Voss, and Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle has been this year's surprise box office beast. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Kevin Hart, Jack Black, Karen Gillan, and Nick Jonas starred in a solid action adventure with some interesting subtle nods to the original Robin Williams movie and other classic films. So I'm gonna point out all the cool stuff you might have missed, and of course, spoiler warning, if you haven't seen the new Jumanji, or the first Jumanji, it's weird to think that there's a Jumanji cinematic universe now, but that's what movies are in 2018. Let's start with the opening image. The first shot shows the original Jumanji game board buried in the sand on a beach in the year 1996, which is a direct callback to the closing shot of the original film, where after the kids tossed the game in a river, it washed up on a beach found by girls speaking French.
Qu'est-ce que c'est ce bruit?
I guess after some poor French coastal city was nearly flattened by rhinos, those girls were like, au revoir, and chucked that thing back to America, where it shows up on the same New Hampshire town 1 year after the events of the revised Jumanji timeline. And yes, revised Jumanji timeline is as weird for me to say as it is for you to hear. And yes, you may have noticed the name of this school where the kids go to in the present day, Brantford High School. Brantford was of course the name of the New Hampshire town where the first movie was set. Now stepping back for a second, I'll admit that when this film was announced and when I saw the trailer, I couldn't help but wonder, is this really a Jumanji movie? Or was it just a great adventure story about kids sucked into a jungle video game that some studio exec was like, hey, with a few tweaks we could market this as a Jumanji movie and use that 90s nostalgia to sell more tickets. I'm evil, but this is also my job. I have kids, don't judge me. I don't like to think too hard about how film sausage gets made, or how any sausage gets made, gross, but the producers of the film did promise it would be an homage to Robin Williams' story. For example, halfway through the movie, you may have noticed how Seaplane's hideout home includes a sign reading, Alan Parrish was here, with Seaplane saying he was the man who built this place. Alan Parrish was of course the name of Robin Williams' character, who was trapped in the game board's jungle for 26 years before Kirsten Dunst and the little monkey boy eventually finished the game he started. So this makes things a little confusing. The Jumanji of this movie is a video game, so does this mean Alan was in that video game too? Just to clear this up, in the opening scene of this sequel, after 1996, Alex refuses to play the board game because it's like lame, Jumanji transforms to evolve with the popular gaming technology of the time in order to better lure victims in to play it. In the 60s flashback of the original movie, it's a board game, with all the steps of the game operating by the rules of a board game, with dice being rolled and game pieces moving along a game board. But in the 90s, Jumanji evolves into a 90s era style video game, with players taking on avatars with different strengths and weaknesses. The villain's name is Van Pelt, the same name as the old-timey bounty hunter in the original. Van Pelt has evolved along with the world of the game from a classic jungle myth character into a stereotypical power-hungry villain from a video game. Actually, there was gonna be an alternate ending for this movie, showing Jumanji popping up on everyone's phones as a mobile game, as this game evolves into a new age of technology. But I suppose Jumanji's secret evil agenda might have just been a little too dark for a fun adventure movie. But this darkness can live on where it belongs, in our minds. Now there are two other fun details that link this movie back to the original Jumanji board game that I'll talk about later. Moving on, it's interesting how these opening scenes in the school foreshadow the adventure that's to come. First, notice the school's mascot is a jaguar, a hint of the jaguar statue that they need to get to later, and the jaguars Van Pelt uses to pursue and attack them. Also, when the four kids sit in the office for detention later, there's a total of 5 chairs, leaving 1 seat empty. This foreshadows the 5th member of the team, Alex, as Seaplane, still waiting to join up with them. Meanwhile, you may have caught Mark Evan Jackson as the principal using some choice words with video game tones. You get 1 life, and choose your weapon. And one more fun detail I caught here, Fridge's jersey is number 94, which was Dwayne Johnson's number when he played football at the University of Miami. Moving on, as they go inside the game, notice how each avatar identity features some fun visual details. Johnson, as Dr. Smolder Bravestone, is largely making fun of himself. His physique and bald head, he even refers to himself in the 3rd person at some point, just like The Rock used to do.
The Rock does not need, The Rock does not want, but The Rock says this.
Now, before I get to that second missable reference The Rock made to his wrestling days, just a quick thank you to our sponsor, Alliance Heroes of the Spire. We couldn't have made this video without them. Alliance Heroes of the Spire is breaking into the top mobile charts. You gotta check it out. It has almost 400 unique heroes that you can combine in over 10,000 different ways on the battlefield. I love this game. The 2 coolest game modes are fighting to the death against crazy giant bosses, as we love in all RPG games, or to battle real people, even your best friends in PvP PvP mode. Not to mention the really massive combats you can fight between guilds, which are amazing. Look, I could talk to you about Alliance for hours, but go see for yourself, you won't regret it. You can actually download Alliance with my links below and get a massive bonus of 50,000 gold and 50 gems right now. What? Look, Jumanji doesn't have to be the only game you care about. As soon as this video is done, get on this. Back to The Rock's subtle self-references in Jumanji. Later on, when fighting a bunch of Van Pelt's guys, he takes down one of them with his classic rock bottom move. No, this is something The Rock does in pretty much every movie. Johnson also mentioned classic Harrison Ford heroes like Indiana Jones as inspiration for Bravestone, with the weathered earth tones of his costume designed to reflect Indies. We'll get to a few other Indy references later, but he also singled out his low-hanging belt and machete as a nod to Han Solo, whose blaster holster hangs a similar way. Ruby Roundhouse, meanwhile, is largely a take on Lara Croft. Martha even points out how impractical her relatively bare wardrobe is for a jungle environment. Kevin Hart as Mouse Finbar has cake listed as his #1 weakness, a totally random detail that sets up one of the funniest physical gags of the whole film.
It's all good.
And if you look closely, his shirt includes a patch showing a slice of cake with a slash through it, warning him not to eat it. By the way, the baker who gives him these rations is played by actor William Tokarski, whom you might know is the creepy murderer from that Adult Swim Too Many Cooks short that came out a few years ago. It's just really unnerving to see this guy show up in the background. And then Jack Black as Bethany's avatar has an interesting name, Shelley, aka Sheldon Oberon. Now in classic literature, Oberon is the king of fairies, most famously known from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. That play was a comedy about 4 young people, 2 men, 2 women, who get lost in a magical wilderness where most of the laughs come from mistaken identity. So I would say there's definitely a parallel here with this movie, specifically Jack Black's character as the pretty girl stuck in the body of an overweight man in his 40s. Midway through the movie, the group realizes the missing piece of the map they've been seeking is actually a missing game piece, which takes the form of this elephant token. You may remember the elephant was Alan Parrish's game piece in the first movie, so it must correspond to whomever the player 1 is. Alan was the first to roll the dice in the first movie, and Alex was the first to play in this one. When Alex leads them through the booby trap tunnel, all of these traps correspond to dangers encountered by Indiana Jones. Actually, the director of this movie was Jake Kasdan, son of Larry Kasdan, the legendary screenwriter who wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark. So for example, arrows fly out at them when they cross into the light, just like they did at Indy in the Raiders Temple. They all have to freeze as razors spin out inches in front of them, just like the first trial Indy faces in the Grail Temple in The Last Crusade. They have to cross over a pit of deadly crocodiles, similar to the one Indy almost falls into in the Temple of Doom. And they traverse this pit with a narrow plank, kind of like the pathway Indy crosses in the Leap of Faith scene in The Last Crusade. And then of course later, when Martha/Ruby Roundhouse go to retrieve the stone, it's surrounded by a pit of snakes designed to target her weakness of venom. It also evokes that classic huge snake pit scene that Indy finds himself in Raiders.
Why did it have to be snakes?
Lastly, after Spencer/Bravestone successfully returns the stone to the Eye of the Jaguar and shouts Jumanji, we get this overhead shot of the jungle transforming. And the map is the same exact design of the interlocking pathways of the original Jumanji game board. Those are all the interesting details I noticed, but a question for you guys. Do you think Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle needed to be a Jumanji sequel? Could it have worked as its own non-Jumanji adventure story about just kids sucked into a video game with interesting, funny, opposing avatars? Look, I really like this movie and I didn't mind all the little nods to the original Jumanji, but this movie did kind of make me miss the 90s, growing up with movies that weren't necessarily sequels or parts of cinematic universes. Like, I know the original Jumanji wasn't totally original and was based on a children's book, but I didn't know that as a kid. I was like, oh, look, a cool new Robin Williams movie. Now it's like the studios think we won't watch movies unless some semi-known brand name is slapped in front of the movie, which is silly. We didn't need that with Toy Story in the 90s, a movie so great and original it inspired an entire cinematic universe of 3 sequels. Anyway, I want to know what your thoughts on this are, so comment down below and tweet me directly at Erik Voss, and follow New Rockstars on Twitter for more updates on our videos. And like and subscribe to New Rockstars for all the details you missed and all the movies you love, Star Wars, Pixar movies, Thor, and all the Avengers films. And if you really want to help us grow as a channel, you can contribute to us on Patreon. Big thanks to all of our donors, by the way, especially Kelly Hopper. You're the best, Kells. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.